Welcome to Crash Data Guidance Tutorial. These training modules are intended to supplement the steps described in the FDOT State Safety Office Crash Data Guidance with hands-on project examples. This recording will be focused on crash data download using Signal 4 Analytics, also called Signal 4. The recording has been developed to help answer questions since the transition from Car Online to Signal 4 as a primary source for FDOT crash data applications. Speaking to you today, we have...
This is Benjamin Jacobs. I am the Florida Department of Transportation State Safety Office's Crash Records and Research Administrator.
And I am Rupert Giroux. I am the Safety Data Coordinator at the Florida Department of Transportation at the State Safety Office.
And I am Benazir Portal and support the State Safety Office as a consultant.
For today's training, we'll share an overview of the Crash Data Guidance's purpose and recent changes since its initial release. This recording is a resource for transportation planners and engineers working with crash data who want to get familiarized with the Signal 4 interface. For the recording, we will use real-life examples to download crash data and walk through the available tools within Signal 4. Some of the key features covered on the platform today include the traffic safety dashboard, crash data download, and the event analysis, types of data downloads, and the crash report download. The Safety Crash Data Guidance was developed to help add clarity and consistency to the use of crash data for safety evaluations. This guide illustrates the steps to access and use the most complete and recent crash data as required by various FDOT manuals to perform safety analysis. The most recent version of the guide can be accessed through the State Safety Office website. The crash data guidance steps have been adjusted to remove the merge data step, as there is no longer a need to pull in the 3 previous crash data resources. Signal 4 is now the main source of crash data for FDOT projects. We have fully transitioned to Signal 4 as the official FDOT repository of crash data, and we are currently adjusting and refining some of the data outputs to fully build out the system functionality.
Each training modules are focused on applying the crash data guidance to project-specific crash data downloads. SSOGIS is an active resource and a good alternative if you do not have Signal 4 access. Car Online will be sunset as we continue to build crash data reporting features into Signal 4. Car Online is currently an available resource, but will be phased out as its functionalities are transitioned to Signal 4. As mentioned at the beginning of the recording, this video focuses on the use of Signal 4 for crash data download, or step 1 of the guide. The project we will use as an example is a resurfacing, restoration, and rehabilitation, or RRR project. The project covers State Road 932 from west of Northwest 82nd Avenue to east of West 6th Avenue in Miami-Dade County. To download the crash data, you will need to determine the number of years of crash data desired. The physical limits and date range for crash data to be downloaded are critical to completing step 1 crash data download. The SSO recommends using the latest 5 full calendar years of data and the current partial year up until the latest date available. When in doubt about how to determine the crash date range to be downloaded, refer to the guide, which provides detailed examples of the date selection. Here is a summary of our study corridor, including proposed mile point limits and date ranges. Our corridor is approximately 2.4 miles long. We will show several ways to identify the roadway limits to search for crash data in a Signal 4 platform during the next live demonstration.
So now we will cover the data download from Signal 4, and for the remaining portion of the training, we're going to go live into the platform itself. A tip that we have shared with folks in previous trainings is to make sure you have, I like to save these on my bookmark so I can easily access these. So once you have landed on the landing page for Signal 4, the platform offers a traffic safety dashboard that shows total crashes. It also provides statistics for fatal and serious injuries, as you're seeing on the screen. This dashboard does not require logging, and there are several query features within the top ribbon that include filtering by the year, filtering by a specific boundary. You can do it by county, district, an MPO, or a city. You could also query by enforcement agency, by emphasis area within our SHSP, or you could also query by the fatality or serious injury or a combination of the two. On the top right corner, you will see a button with a little silhouette. Once you click there, you're going to be able to hit login to Signal 4. And this is where you're going to put in your personal login information. As Ben and Rupert mentioned at the beginning of this training, we really want to focus the remainder of the time on walking through a few options on how you would go about downloading data from Signal 4. So in order to do that, if you happen to land on a different page once you're logged in, you can always click on the ribbon to the left, and where you want to make sure you're downloading crash data or go to is the event analysis tab on the left. Once you are on this screen, you're gonna select new query. There are multiple ways you can go about downloading crash data. Specifically, as a refresher, we have a RRR that has about 2.4 miles in length. First, let me navigate to the location. As we mentioned, this is in Miami-Dade County, State Road 932, right above the airport. And one thing to be aware, some added features that came into Signal 4 include specifying what are your limits. You could select crash data to be downloaded by a specific intersection, by a street, by a custom network, or specifically by a DOT roadway. Let me start from the bottom, and I'll say DOT. From the information that Rupert walked us through, this is where having the roadway ID and the mile point range can come in very handy. So if I navigate back to Signal 4, I can select the roadway ID. I'm going to put these side by side so it's easy to follow on your end. So for example, with the roadway ID, I just copy the digits, and you're going to notice that it gives me the full extent of that roadway ID. You could modify by changing the endpoints. You could also modify the extent by modifying manually the mile point range and typing in the information like we have it on the left of the screen. So I can specify that I want the data to be downloaded from 0.55 to 2.947. And you can see how those limits are getting adjusted on the screen. Note that if you were to select this, the crash data download will be focused on the state road, and the side streets or intersecting street crash data most likely will not be covered within the data download. If you have a corridor, that's probably not ideal because oftentimes the side intersections do have crash data that are relevant to the corridor, whether it is to a signalized intersection that it's placed within, in this case, State Road 932, or there may be a large driveway that it's generating a lot of friction with the main roadway. In that case, you may want to select a different way of creating a boundary or a different way to query the crash data for download. In that particular case, when we have a long segment, what I recommend is creating a boundary or custom geographic area. Oftentimes, there's a lot of nuances to how those intersection influence areas vary along a corridor. You could have a major intersection that actually the influence area is 300 feet, or an unsignalized intersection that you only have 50 feet of storage length for the turn lane. So to me, that is a really important piece of information as you're looking into downloading crash data. And when you get to do that, my recommendation, and this is something that you're gonna hear through the previous recordings, and we go in more depth on how you would go about selecting the boundary, but go into your aerial imagery and visually see how those turn lanes are laid out and whether they are considered part of the influence area for the project that you're going to be working on. The really neat feature within Signal 4 that we're very excited as daily users of the platform is actually any boundary that you create, you could actually save and upload it for future if you need to verify crash data, how it was downloaded, verify limits. And oftentimes what could happen, you could select your project boundaries, the project goes through its design phase, you have a public meeting, and there's additional feedback from the public that requires to either re-download crash data to cover the most recent. So if you're not saving your boundary, that could create discrepancies on the data output that you're getting. So I highly encourage folks to take advantage of this feature where you can save the boundaries within Signal 4 platform. So I'll toggle back to grayscale map for background because it makes it easy to share. And you can see how I'm navigating through these. It's pretty user-friendly. And once you have your boundary selected, just make sure you hit confirm. And this would be the way I would recommend downloading crash data for a project like we have on the example. Important to note, we also want to show you a few additional features within the crash data download. So let's get out of custom administrative tab and note that within those features that I was showing earlier, you have the DOT roadway, which is what we walked through a moment ago, but you also have intersection, street, and customer network. For intersection, once you select that, it should be able to show you the locations where we have intersection or nodes within the database. And a really neat feature that you're seeing up here is, let's say your intersection is actually 500 feet. You have 3 left turns and your, left turn bay or left turn storage lanes really extend back. So you have the freedom to select that offset or influence area for the intersection itself. So you could define to have it for all approaches. You could have it for specific approaches within the intersection.
The offset distance to the left of where you are is where you would change the distance to the left.
Oh, sorry. So the one right here, I was looking at the wrong. Perfect. Any additional functionalities that come to mind from the work that has been done to Signal 4 as far as location selection for crash data download?
In this context, it's important to note that you're selecting a single intersection. It doesn't give you an option to select multiple. There are other ways to select a single intersection, including drawing the shape around it.
So you could go to the aerial mode, go under costume, new, and basically create the boundary yourself, rather than relying on an automated or like a generic offset distance. I think this is my preferred method because it really eliminates the potential for missing crashes and really helps the analyst get down to the level of looking at the conditions for the particular intersection.
With some care, you could probably eliminate the exiting approaches from the area. The crash locations are distributed left and right. Usually the lines on the map line up with the aerial, but not always, but most of the time. So.
And I would suggest doing that on a case by case. And just to clarify you could also move that. I didn't realize that was gonna move that. but for example, in this approach, most often we're looking at crashes that are incoming to the intersection. So if crashes are happening on the departure lane, an applicability or example that comes to mind is if you are adjacent or nearby interchange or freeway, that actually a lot of crashes could be captured from the interchange influence area. You probably just, to minimize post-processing time of removing those non-intersection related crashes, that could be a really good application of getting rid of that boundary of the departure lanes within your intersection. One last feature in terms of selecting is the street itself. And what you could do is just, let me toggle back to grayscale map. And basically you would manually select the links that you're interested in downloading. It is a little cumbersome if you have 2.4 miles, depending on how the road has been segmented, you could spend a lot of time. So not recommended for extended lengths. What I do think it would be a lot of value to be able to do that is for freeway ramps where the roadway ID may not be handy, where we are unsure of the limits where that particular segment goes through. So there are a lot of options, and I think it's probably best to determine what is the best way of selecting your boundary or query, depending on the project that you have. So we have given you a few options. If there are more questions or an applicability, you can always let us know and we can help clarify through similar tutorials on how to best apply the tools within Signal 4. So for a particular example for today, we're going to go back to our State Road 932 project for the RRR. And you can see the little legs that were drawn to consider the influence area of those large intersections. So I'll go ahead and select that or confirm. One important piece, make sure you are updating your date range and consistent with the crash data guidance language. And as you can tell, it defaults to the availability of the crash data. In this particular case, we have data available through June 22nd. There are also additional features on the menu to the left that you can use to query. And these are extremely helpful if the study that you're doing has a particular focus. So for example, if I'm only interested in doing fatal crash review or like taking a look at the data that includes fatals, that's a really neat feature that can filter down the data pool that you're doing from Signal 4. For this type of projects, you probably want all crashes and just get an understanding of trends and patterns along the corridor to see if any roadway features need to be fixed. You could also query down by lighting condition. I know nighttime is probably one of the main things we are looking when we're looking at crash data for a particular project. You could consider weather related crashes and additional types. There are additional attributes. There's also a filter for crash type. And one of the most helpful ones, we oftentimes are working on projects that are pet bike or non-motorist focused. So under the road users, under participants, you'll be able to see that we can select pedestrians and bicyclists, or for that matter, motorcycles, since it is part of the SHSP. So for user behavior, there's also an option to download for impaired driving and speeding related if it's documented within the crash reports. If you have been working with crash data, you probably are aware that these user behavior are not consistently filled in or documented, and it varies by enforcement agency. So as usual, use caution when making downloads that are only queried to those types of crash attributes. Any additional highlights, Ben or Rupert, we want to share?
There's in the target 0 option here in those icons at the top, there's a target 0 button. The emphasis areas are pre-filtered for you. So if you're focused on a specific emphasis area as defined by the state, that's an option that gets you through this with a little less fiddling. If you want more control over the exact circumstances of the data set that you're filtering, then you would use the standard event analysis like we're showing here.
And you
Thank
both
you.
covered it.
Thank you. So they're my crash data gurus. We're gonna go back to, as you can probably tell, the information was cleared out from my initial query. I'm gonna load the map for our triple R. And now we're gonna walk through one of the important questions that may come to mind as you're downloading the crash data. As you can see from the screen, I have gotten the output for my corridor. There's additional features that go into the map. One of the really neat attributes that I was very excited to see was the legend that it's available on the bottom left corner right above that attribute table on the screen. And you can see the breakdown or the legend it's displaying severity. And Ben, do you want to walk us through this?
The geolocation status imagery, or the spots that show the gradations by geolocation status, are focused on verified and preliminary. So the green spots in this version of the imagery is the symbolization. So in the symbolization for geolocation status, the green spots are verified. That means that the FDOT, the staff here, has reviewed those crashes and verified their locations. So that's a 2-level review. These will have been looked at by at least one editor who places the crash initially, and at least one other person verifying that placement. The preliminary statuses, as Benazir has opened it up and activated the sub symbolization under that, these preliminary statuses are placed initially by the system or by the officer, or have been placed by an editor, but not yet reached the second level of review. So the preliminaries you're seeing there, the dark blues are placed by an editor. Those are probably pretty trustworthy because someone who does this every day has made the update to place that crash there. The officer locations are as accurate as the officer is. They are often good, but as you can see, some of those blue dots are farther off the road, and that tends to be a trend with some of the officer placements, that they're sitting close to the crash and they're not putting the placement exactly on the road where it occurred, but it's close. The other ones in the lighter shades are computer confident, computer approximate, and a plot based on a geographic coordinate that's somewhere on the crash report. Those tend to be less reliable than the officer mapped or the editor mapped crashes. So this is provided so that you can have an idea of how much of the crash data set should be reviewed for accuracy. For the preliminary crashes, you would want to check to be sure that those things are placed if your requirement is focused on a very small area. If it's focused along a corridor, the chances are good that these will all be associated appropriately with that corridor. So you can generally use the preliminary locations when they're along a corridor. The purple for multi-point just means that there are multiple crashes at the same point on the map. And when you hover on that and click, it will expand and show you how many crashes and what their current status is at that particular point on the roadway.
Thank you, Ben. And one additional legend that we have within the platform, you can also toggle to the day or night symbology. And that is extremely helpful if you're trying to get a quick sense of concentration of crashes by lighting conditions. So let's talk about crash data download itself. There are several ways or formats of the type of data that you could download. For FDOT project specific, we are recommending using the FDOT roadway, which includes some roadway features, but mainly what the output that you used to get from car online resembles what you're seeing under the crash and roadway and vehicle 1 and 2 and driver 1 and 2. So if you're looking something similar to the output that you used to get from car online, this is the data source that we're going to be taking a closer look at. Note that you could go ahead and download crash reports if they are under the 300 record limit. As you can see on the bottom right, we actually have 4,500 crashes for this corridor during the date range. So you can see that that's been grayed out. And in future trainings, we'll walk through additional ideas or tips on how you would go about accessing that. For now, we're going to go ahead and download the crash data as it's recommended for similar output from car online. If you're a Signal 4 user, you already know that once you hit the download request, it gives you this message, and an email once the data is ready will be sent to your inbox, and you will be able to download a zip file that will have the additional information. So for now, I will give it a minute until it downloads. Also, if you're not familiar with Signal 4 or you're new to it, you're going to notice that you could, if you have access to crash reports, you're going to be able to select and open that particular crash report. If you see it as a hyperlink on the left for HSMV report number, that should be an easy, a quick way to obtain the crash report record. There's additional attributes that are summarized on the table, but this is not a comprehensive list of the attributes that you're going to get from the download itself. So it's taking a little bit of time. Ben, any additions on conversation for crash data download or features for folks to be aware of from the different options?
We'll get into this a little bit more later, but we should note that the crash data in Signal 4 are redacted, which means that the personal information that might be part of the crash information in general has been removed. So when you download the data, the crash data you have in the CSV files is de-identified and is generally able to be shared as needed. The police crash reports are documents that do contain personal information, and their privacy is protected under law. So we recommend that you don't create copies of them if you don't have to. This is one reason we have the ability to review them online. If it's sufficient to pull up the list and review the documents on the screen, then you're not creating a second record by copying or downloading them.
Let me refresh. So I received that email from Signal 4. I'll go ahead and download. And I will open the folder. All right, it finished downloading. So I'm gonna, this is the output that it comes in a zip file for the extract. It only includes the data, the type of data download that I requested. And within these two, you're gonna be able to see the injury summary, and the one that I particularly mentioned that it's the car online output is gonna come as with the name crash roadway. And this is just to give a feel for the data export that you would be receiving from before. In future trainings, we'll go over a lot of the features that are and nuances that are available through the different data formats, but something that I also find a lot of value, especially if you're working with large data sets, is the geolocation. It comes in a shapefile and extremely helpful to use if you already have some GIS files laid out for your particular project. There's also the pet bike typing that provides additional information for pet bike crashes.
We should say specifically that geolocation file is a GDB, a geodatabase file. So in addition to what you would get in a shapefile, it includes some of the database structure with it. So the reference code table references and things like that.
Perfect. So in summary, we have walked through event analysis download, and we want to share additional information on the crash report usage and some of the limitations and responsibilities that come along with access to the database.
All right. We want to note that there will be a 60-day lag in the general availability of the crash data. This is due to privacy requirements that were implemented starting March 1st, 2023 under Florida statute. The redacted crash information, as we mentioned a little earlier, is available through Signal 4, and for DOT accounts, it will be available within the 60-day window. But for non-DOT accounts, they won't be able to see crash data until 60 days after it's submitted to FLHSMV. When we say redacted, we mean that the personally identifying information has been censored or removed in some way. So let's talk about handling the data. Any crash report or data that's derived from the crash report that may contain personal information for individuals involved in the crash is confidential and needs to be handled appropriately. Selected staff and agencies, which are also referred to as eligible parties, are authorized to receive the data that includes personal information, and those documents and information can only be shared with eligible parties. The liability is that anyone who knowingly releases the data to someone outside the eligible parties or who misuses the personal data commits a third-degree felony. And lastly, your responsibility as a Signal 4 user is that documents and data that have personal information must have that personal information removed, or otherwise they can only be shared with other eligible parties. If you're providing access to documents or data that reveal personal information, the Signal 4 user is required to request that outside requesters establish their identity and eligibility, first of all, and then in addition, they have to sign a sworn statement that they will not misuse or release the information in a way that's not allowed under law. That covers it briefly, but please let us know if you have specific concerns or questions. Thank you for watching the training module on how to download crash data using Signal 4. This module is a supplement to the recording of Step 1 from the FDOT SSO crash data guidance.